The heavy steel chain rattled against the frost-covered pavement, like the bones of a skeleton being dragged across a grave. It was 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of December morning where the air is so cold it feels like swallowing broken glass. Blue and red lights strobed against the hand-carved archway I had spent 3 weeks sanding and staining. The one that read, Mercer's Holiday Market, in gold leaf lettering. A massive tow truck, its engine idling with a guttural growl, was backing up toward my livelihood, the driver looking bored as he chewed on a toothpick. I stood by the stone fire pit in the center of the plaza, pouring black coffee from a thermos into a tin mug. I did not move to block the truck. I did not scream. I did not wave my arms. I simply watched the steam rise from my cup, checking the expensive tactical watch on my wrist. I was waiting for the timing to align with the inevitable. Standing 10 feet away, screaming loud enough to wake the dead in the church cemetery 3 blocks over, was Octavia Prentice. She was wearing a tailored light blue suit that cost more than my truck, a garment entirely unsuited for the freezing temperature. Yet she stood there, impervious to the cold, fueled entirely by the heat of her own entitlement. She was pointing a manicured finger at the sheriff's deputy, a young man who looked like he regretted every life choice that had led him to this parking lot. "Tear it all down!" she shrieked, her voice cracking like a whip. "He is squatting on community land!" I want every stall flattened, and that sign turned into firewood before breakfast. Seize it all. Behind her, standing in the shadows of the flickering street lamp, was Thaddeus Hale. He was the silence to her noise, the ice to her fire. He wore a camel hair coat that looked soft enough to melt, and a cashmere scarf draped with practiced nonchalance. He did not scream. He did not point. He simply adjusted his leather gloves and leaned in to whisper something into the ear of the police sergeant standing next to the deputy. I watched the sergeant's eyes widen slightly, then narrow. He nodded, his hand drifting instinctively to the holster on his hip. Thaddeus smiled, a small, tight expression that didn't reach his eyes. He looked at me with the pity one might reserve for a stray dog that is about to be put down. He thought he was playing chess against a man who only knew how to play checkers. He thought the flannel shirt, the work boots, and the rough beard were the sum total of my existence. He had no idea that the man drinking coffee in the cold wasn't a carpenter, but a predator who had spent 15 years hunting things far more dangerous than a suburban homeowners association. I reached into my back pocket. The movement was slow, deliberate. The deputy flinched, his hand tightening on his taser. Octavia stepped back, a flicker of fear crossing her face before her arrogance reasserted itself. She sneered, likely expecting me to pull out a weapon or a sob story. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen and dialed 3 digits. 911. I pressed the call button and held it to my ear, locking eyes with Thaddeus. Octavia let out a bark of incredulous laughter. "You are calling the police," she scoffed, stepping closer, her perfume cloying and sweet against the sharp winter air. "You idiot! We already called them. They are standing right here. You are calling the people who are about to arrest you." Thaddeus shook his head, a look of disappointed fatherly concern plastered on his face. "This is nonsense, Mr. Mercer," he said, his voice smooth, low, and terrifyingly calm. "You are making this harder than it needs to be. Just walk away. Save yourself the embarrassment of a cell." But I wasn't listening to them. I wasn't speaking to the local dispatcher. My phone was routed through a secure channel, bypassing the county switchboard entirely. I wasn't calling the local police to report a trespassing dispute. I was calling the cavalry. Octavia thought the badge on the deputy's chest was the highest authority in this parking lot. She didn't know the piece of metal in my back pocket outranked the entire county. To understand why I was standing in a freezing plaza waiting for a federal raid, you have to rewind 72 hours. I didn't come to Oak Haven to sell Christmas ornaments. I didn't come here because I had a passion for holiday cheer or a desire to knit scarves.
I came here because numbers don't lie, but people do. My name is Cade Mercer, and for the last decade, I have been a senior forensic auditor for the United States Treasury. My job isn't to arrest bank robbers. It is to find the invisible cracks in the financial system where the rats hide their stolen grain. I track money laundering, embezzlement, and high-level fraud. And usually, I chase cartels or corrupt senators. But 6 months ago, during a routine audit of a failed municipal bond from the 1920s, I found a discrepancy. A 0.02% variance in a property tax ledger that shouldn't have existed. It was a ghost number, a rounding error that had been siphoned off for 3 decades. It led me here. To Oak Haven Plaza.
To a town square that was supposedly public land managed by the prestigious Oak Haven Heights HOA. I arrived 3 days ago, not as an agent, but as a man looking to rent space. I needed to be on the ground. I needed to see who was signing the checks. I rented a trailer, parked it on the edge of town, and spent 48 hours building the Mercer Holiday Market. I wasn't just hammering nails and hanging garland. Every string of lights I hung concealed a high-resolution directional microphone disguised as a pine cone. Every payment terminal I installed was wired with military-grade encryption software designed to clone the transaction routing numbers of anyone who interfaced with the local grid. I scanned the perimeter of the plaza with the eyes of a man setting a kill zone. I grid-mapped the electrical load with military precision, ensuring that my setup would draw exactly enough power to be noticeable, but not enough to trip a breaker, unless someone forced it to. I noticed a loose bolt on a stall 50 yards away and tightened it, not because I cared about structural integrity for the sake of safety, but because disorder offends me. I speak in short, clipped sentences because in my line of work, extra words are just extra opportunities for someone to lie to you. The land itself was the first weapon in my arsenal. Octavia Prentice and the HOA believed they owned Oak Haven Plaza. They had built their marble fountain and their manicured hedges right in the center of it. They charged vendors permitting fees and beautification taxes to operate there. But they didn't own it. The discrepancy I found led me to a dusty basement in the county clerk's office, to a document titled the 1928 Municipal Bond Default. When the city went bankrupt during the Great Depression, the land title for the plaza didn't revert to the city. It was held as collateral by the bondholders, and those bonds had never been paid off. They had been sold, bundled, resold, and eventually forgotten in a slush fund of bad debt. I bought that debt. I bought the paper holding the lien on Oak Haven Plaza at a blind municipal auction for $500. Because nobody else read the fine print. I didn't just rent a booth for Christmas.
I owned the ground beneath their feet. I owned the dirt under Octavia's high heels. But I couldn't just wave a deed and arrest them. I needed them to commit a crime in real time. I needed them to cross state lines with stolen money. I needed them to sabotage a federally protected easement. So I built the prettiest, brightest, most irresistible trap I could think of. A Christmas market. Opening day was 7 a.m., sharp. The sun hadn't even crested the horizon when the first clipboard slammed onto my counter. It hit the wood with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. I didn't flinch. I continued arranging a stack of hand-carved wooden bears, aligning them perfectly. Slowly, I looked up. Octavia Prentice loomed over me. Up close, the light blue suit was even more aggressive. A sharp, synthetic color that clashed with the natural wood and evergreen of the market. Her hair was sprayed into a helmet of blonde invincibility. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't say hello. She tapped a long, acrylic fingernail on a piece of paper clipped to her board. Regulation 902-B, she announced, her voice projecting so that the few early shoppers could hear her. Unauthorized commercial activity within the Historical Preservation District. You are in violation of the community charter. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate these premises, or I will have the power cut and your inventory impounded. I picked up the mug of coffee I had placed on the counter. I took a slow sip. "Good morning to you too," I said, my voice flat. "I have a permit from the city clerk, signed and stamped." I slid the paper across the counter. She didn't even look at it. She swept it onto the muddy ground with a backhanded motion. "The city clerk does not have jurisdiction here, Mr. Mercer," she sneered. "The Oak Haven Heights HOA manages this plaza. We protect the property values of this town from eyesores." She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my flannel shirt and the sawdust on my boots. "And this is a significant eyesore." That was when Thaddeus Hale stepped out from behind her. He moved like smoke. One moment he wasn't there, and the next he was leaning against the support post of my stall, looking for all the world like a benevolent uncle. He smiled, and I saw the shark beneath the surface. He was the treasurer, the man who handled the money, the man whose signature was on the laundered accounts I had been tracking for months. "Octavia is passionate," Thaddeus said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. He reached out and brushed a speck of invisible dust from his cashmere sleeve. "But she has a point. We have standards. However, I am sure a man of your limited resources cannot afford a war with an organization as well-funded as ours. Perhaps we can find a solution, a compromise." I looked at him. I looked at his shoes, Italian leather, handcrafted, worth more than the lumber in this entire stall. I looked at his watch, a vintage timepiece that retailed for $30,000. On a treasurer's salary? I don't think so. Thaddeus thinks he can guess my net worth by my boots. Before the snow hits the fan, I'm curious. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop your country in the comments. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the counter. "I am listening," I said. Thaddeus smiled, thinking he had me hooked. "A donation," he whispered, "to the beautification fund. Let's say $5,000. Cash would be preferable for administrative speed, of course. But since you seem like a modern man, a wire transfer would suffice. If the funds clear by noon, I can convince Octavia to overlook Regulation 902-B. We can consider it a retroactive permitting fee. It was the opening move. Extortion, plain and simple. If I paid, they would think I was weak. If I refused, they would shut me down before I could get the evidence I needed. I needed to pay them, but I needed to do it in a way that nailed their coffin shut. "I don't carry that kind of cash," I lied, "but I can do a wire transfer." Thaddeus's eyes glittered. "Excellent. I will text you the routing number." He tapped a card onto the counter. It was a business card, embossed, heavy stock. Thaddeus Hale, financial advisor. I waited until they walked away, watching them move through the crowd. Octavia was stopping at other vendors, likely shaking them down for smaller amounts. Thaddeus walked with his hands in his pockets, surveying the square like a feudal lord surveying his serfs. I pulled out my secure phone and initiated the transfer. $5,000. But I didn't send it from a personal checking account. I sent it from a shadow account controlled by the Treasury Department, tagged with a digital marker that would trace the money through every hop, skip, and jump it made. I marked the transfer memo line clearly. Federal evidence. It was a brazen move. If Thaddeus or Octavia actually looked at the metadata of the transfer, they would see it. But arrogance is a blinder. They would see the zeros, not the source. By noon, the market was packed. The smell of roasted chestnuts and pine filled the air. Families were walking through the aisles, buying hand-carved ornaments and drinking hot cocoa. The atmosphere was festive, joyous, and exactly what Octavia hated. I watched her from my central stall. She was standing near the fountain, pacing. She was furious that the market was successful. She hated the noise, the crowds, the people who didn't live in the gated community encroaching on her territory. She wanted it gone. Thaddeus stood beside her. I saw him lean in. I adjusted my earpiece, tuning into the frequency of the microphone I had planted in the decorative wreath near the fountain. His voice came through crystal clear, cutting through the static of the crowd. "It is a shame about the electrical grid, Octavia," Thaddeus murmured. His voice was like velvet wrapped around a razor blade. "If it were to overload, if there were a surge, the fire marshal would have no choice but to evacuate. Public safety, after all." Just a thought. It wasn't a thought. It was an instruction. Octavia nodded, her eyes narrowing. She pulled out her phone and made a call. 20 minutes later, I saw a white van pull up to the maintenance access point behind the plaza. 2 men in blue jumpsuits got out. They weren't utility workers. They were HOA maintenance staff. I watched on my laptop screen, hidden beneath the counter, as they pried open the transformer box. This was the escalation I needed. Financial fraud was one thing. But sabotaging a power grid? That was reckless endangerment. That was tampering with public infrastructure. I could have stopped them. I could have walked over there and flashed my badge. But I needed the act to be completed. I needed the lights to go out. I needed to panic. It was a cold calculation, but in my line of work, you let the villain pull the trigger so you can take the gun. HOA. I watched the voltage meter on my tablet spike. They were bypassing the regulator. They were going to surge the line. I braced myself. Suddenly, with a sound like a cracking whip, the transformer blew. A shower of sparks rained down on the snow behind the plaza. Every string of lights, every heater, every digital register in the market died instantly. The music cut out. The plaza was plunged into gray afternoon twilight. Screams erupted from the crowd, not of pain, but of surprise and fear. People stumbled in the sudden dimness. Right on cue, a red SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. The door flew open, and Silas Vane, the local fire marshal, stepped out. He was a heavy-set man with a face that looked like kneaded dough and eyes that shifted constantly. He moved with a speed that defied his bulk. He didn't inspect the transformer. He didn't check the breakers. He marched straight to the center of the plaza, flanked by Octavia and Thaddeus. "This is a public hazard," Silas bellowed, his voice booming. "This market is drawing too much power. The wiring is substandard. I am declaring this an immediate fire risk. Everyone must evacuate. Shut it down! Shut it all down!" Octavia looked triumphant. She stood with her arms crossed, the light blue suit looking like a bruise against the snow. "See?" she shouted at the crowd. "I told you! This is what happens when you let unauthorized vendors into our neighborhood. Dangerous! Irresponsible! I stepped out of my booth. I walked calmly toward them. The crowd parted for me. I held my tablet in my hand. "Marshal Vane," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "Before you sign that order, you should look at this." Silas sneered at me. "I don't need to look at your iPad, buddy. I have eyes. You overloaded the grid." "Actually, I didn't," I said, turning the screen so he could see the graph. "This is a real-time monitor of the voltage draw for the entire market. We were operating at 40% capacity. Stable. Green. Until 3 minutes ago." I swiped the screen. A new graph appeared. "This," I pointed, "is an external surge, originating from the maintenance panel behind the fountain, a panel that was accessed by HOA staff at 12:18 p.m. I have the video footage from my security camera." Silas froze. He looked at the screen, then at Octavia. He hadn't signed up for video evidence. He had signed up for a quick payout and a power trip. Octavia's face flushed red. "That is nonsense. You faked that. You manipulated the data. Code doesn't matter, Mr. Mercer. I matter. I am the president of this association, and I say this market is closed." Thaddeus stepped in, placing a calming hand on Octavia's shoulder. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine calculation in his eyes. He realized I wasn't just a carpenter, but he still underestimated the threat. He thought I was a clever tech guy, maybe a lawyer. He winked at me. A slow, deliberate wink. "You have a very sophisticated setup, Mr. Mercer," Thaddeus said quietly. "But the fire marshal has made his ruling. You can appeal to it, of course. In court, which will take months. By then, Christmas will be over, and you will be bankrupt." He loved the chaos. I realized it then. He didn't care about the market. He didn't even care about the HOA. He wanted Octavia to do something illegal, something public and messy, so he could blackmail her later. He was using me as the weapon to take her job. He was playing a game of thrones in a homeowners association. The crowd was dispersing, grumbling, unhappy. The market was dead in the water. Silas slapped a bright orange condemnation sticker on my archway. "You have 24 hours to clear this debris," Silas grunted, "or the city impounds it." I watched them walk away. Octavia was beaming, feeling the rush of victory. Thaddeus was checking his phone, likely confirming the deposit of my $5,000 into his offshore account. They thought they had won. They thought they had crushed the little guy. I went back to my trailer. I didn't pack. I didn't call a moving company. I sat at my small metal desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up the banking trace. The $5,000 had moved. It had gone from the HOA General Fund to a shell company called Vanguard Consulting, and then, just as I suspected, it had hopped across the border to a bank in the Caymans. Federal wire fraud. Check. Then I pulled up the property records again. The easement. I printed out a fresh copy of the 1928 bond default. I highlighted the section regarding public access and obstruction. I prepared a document of my own. Not a permit. Not a plea. A cease and desist order citing the federal preservation statutes attached to the bond. I barely slept. I waited. I knew they wouldn't wait 24 hours. They were greedy. They were impatient. They wanted to erase me. At 2 a.m., the headlights swept across the plaza. I was awake, sitting in the dark of my trailer, watching the monitors. A convoy of trucks. Not official city tow trucks. Private contractors. The sides of the trucks read Prentice Towing and Recovery, her husband's company, conflict of interest. Another check mark on my list. I stepped out into the cold night air. The snow had started to fall again, dusting the shut-down market in white. Octavia was there, wrapped in a fur coat over her suit. She had rallied a dozen neighbors, lying to them, telling them I was stealing power, telling them I was a squatter. They stood in a human chain across the entrance, looking self-righteous and cold. Thaddeus was there too, standing apart from the group, smoking a thin cigar. He saw me coming and walked to meet me halfway. "It is over, son," Thaddeus said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "Look at them. Octavia has the town on her side. She has the police in her pocket. She has the fire marshal. Why don't you just sign the title over to the HOA? Give us the inventory. I can make sure she doesn't press criminal negligence charges for the power outage. I can make this painless." He held out a clipboard. "A transfer of assets agreement." I took the clipboard. I clicked on a small penlight and shone it on the document. I read the fine print. The beneficiary wasn't the Oakhaven Heights HOA. It was Vanguard Consulting, Thaddeus's shell company. He was trying to steal the inventory and the infrastructure for himself, under the guise of an HOA seizure. I looked up at him. My breath plumed in the air. "You don't want the market closed," I said. "You want the land. You know about the bond, don't you? You found the default years ago. That's why you're the treasurer. You've been bleeding the HOA dry, waiting for the city to finally condemn the plaza so you could buy the title through your shell company. I am just a speed bump." Thaddeus stopped smiling. His eyes went dead. "I want order, Mr. Mercer, and you are a disorder. Sign the paper, or Octavia will have you arrested tonight." I handed the clipboard back to him. "No," I said. Thaddeus sighed. "A pity." He turned to Octavia and nodded. "That brings us back to 7 a.m., the tow truck backing up. The police arrived. The light blue suit screams. The world is holding its breath." Octavia pointed at the deputy. "Arrest him! Disturbing the peace! Trespassing!" The deputy stepped forward, his hand on his handcuffs. "Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back." I looked at the deputy. I looked at Octavia. I looked at Thaddeus, who was watching with a bored expression, checking his watch, ready to deposit the next check, ready to steal the next acre of land. "I am not turning around," I said. The deputy pulled his taser. "Sir, this is your last warning." I held up my hand. "I will go quietly," I said. "But first, I want you to run the license plate on that tow truck, the one backing up to my archway." The deputy paused. "Why?" "Because," I said, my voice rising just enough to be heard over the idling engine. "That truck was reported stolen from a construction yard in Detroit 3 days ago, and the man driving it is on parole for grand theft auto." Octavia froze. Thaddeus stiffened. The tow truck driver slammed on his brakes and looked out the window, panic in his eyes. "That is a lie!" Octavia shrieked. "My husband owns that truck!" "Does he?" I asked. "Or does he lease it from a shell company that acquires assets through insurance fraud?" The deputy looked at the truck, then back at me. He was confused. The situation was spiraling out of his control. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, run a tag for me." Thaddeus realized something was wrong. He stepped forward. "Officer, don't listen to him. He is stalling. Arrest him now." But it was too late. My phone, still in my hand, buzzed. A single vibration. The signal. I put the phone on speaker. A voice, authoritative and crisp, rang out. "This is Director Miller, United States Treasury. We are executing the warrant. Secure the perimeter." Octavia blinked. "Who is that?" I looked at Thaddeus. He was backing away, slowly, his hands trembling slightly. I reached into my flannel shirt. The movement was smooth. I pulled out the leather wallet I had kept hidden against my chest for 3 days. I flipped it open. The gold badge caught the reflection of the strobe lights, shining like a star in the darkness. "Senior Investigator Cade Mercer," I said, the words hanging in the freezing air. "United States Treasury, Organized Crime Division. And nobody is going anywhere." The silence that followed was absolute. The tow truck engine seemed to fade away. The wind stopped howling. Octavia stopped breathing. Thaddeus stopped moving. I looked at Thaddeus, whose face had gone the color of old ash. "You didn't just try to steal land, Thaddeus," I said, walking toward him. "That check I wrote you? It was marked bills, digital isotopes. You deposited it into a personal offshore account an hour ago. That is federal wire fraud. That is money laundering. And the power cut, sabotaging a public utility grid, is an act of domestic terrorism under the Patriot Act." Thaddeus tried to speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I turned to Octavia. She was shaking, her light blue suit suddenly looking very thin, very cheap. "And you," I said, "you hired a stolen truck to destroy federal evidence. Because this plaza, it's not HOA land. It's a federal preservation zone. And I just bought the bond that proves it." The sound of sirens filled the air, but they weren't the local chirps of the deputy's cruiser. They were the deep, resonant wails of heavy interceptors. 3 black SUVs, unmarked, tinted windows, tore into the parking lot, cutting off the exits, boxing in the tow truck. Men and women in windbreakers with "Federal Agent" printed in bold yellow letters on the back poured out, weapons drawn, moving with the precision of a tidal wave. The local deputy took his hand off his taser and stepped back, raising his hands in surrender. He knew a bigger fish when he saw one. I walked up to Thaddeus. He looked at me with genuine shock, his facade of the subtle manipulator crumbling into dust. Who are you?" he whispered. I smiled, cold and sharp. "I am the guy who reads the fine print." The agents moved in. Octavia screamed as they spun her around, pressing her against the hood of the stolen tow truck. Thaddeus tried to adjust his scarf, tried to maintain some dignity, but an agent grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back. The click of handcuffs echoed across the plaza. "Wait!" Octavia yelled, her face pressed against the cold metal. "He told me to do it! Thaddeus told me it was legal. He said he was a financial advisor." Thaddeus closed his eyes. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. I leaned in close to him. "The misunderstanding, Thaddeus, is that you thought you were playing a game. You weren't. You were just organizing the evidence for your own conviction." The snow began to fall harder, covering the plaza in a fresh white blanket. The market was silent, save for the sounds of justice being served. The flashing lights reflected in the ice of the frozen fountain. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold now, but it tasted better than any champagne. The neighbors, the ones who had formed the human chain, stood frozen, their mouths open. They looked from me to Octavia in handcuffs, then to the federal agents swarming the scene. They began to lower their arms. The hostility evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that they had been pawns in a game they didn't understand. I turned to the deputy. "You can go," I said, "unless you want to explain to these agents why you were about to enforce an illegal eviction on federal property without a warrant." The deputy didn't hesitate. He got in his cruiser and backed away, disappearing into the morning mist. I looked at the market, my trap. It worked perfectly. But the paperwork was going to be a nightmare. I watched as they loaded Thaddeus into the back of a transport van. He looked at me one last time through the reinforced window. He didn't look like a manipulator anymore. He just looked old. I turned back to the fire pit. A young kid, maybe 10 years old, had wandered out from the crowd of neighbors. He was looking at the wooden bears on my counter. He looked scared. I walked over. I picked up the best bear, the one carved from cedar. I handed it to him. "The market's open," I said. The kid smiled. I took a deep breath of the cold air. The job was done. The bad guys were in cuffs. The land was safe. If you're still here at this point, let me know you stand with the truth by typing justice in the comments. Handcuffs are heavy, cold, and humiliating, but for men like Thaddeus Hale, they are often just temporary jewelry. I watched the transport van disappear around the corner of Main Street, the blue lights fading into the gray morning mist, and I let myself feel a moment of satisfaction. But in my line of work, satisfaction is dangerous. It makes you slow. It makes you think the war is over when you have only won a skirmish. I turned back to the market, where the vendors were tentatively plugging their heaters back in, and the smell of roasted nuts was beginning to combat the scent of diesel fumes. The air was still freezing, but the tension had broken. Or so I thought. 3 hours later, my secure phone buzzed. It was Director Miller. I answered on the first ring, stepping into the privacy of my trailer. The news was not good. A county judge, one I hadn't vetted yet, had granted Thaddeus an emergency bail hearing before the ink on the arrest report was even dry. He was out. $2 million bond posted by a surety company that traced back to a holding firm in Delaware. Octavia was still in a cell, crying about her ruined reputation, but Thaddeus was walking free. The director told me to watch my back. Thaddeus wasn't just a treasurer. He was a fixer with friends in high, dark places. I hung up the phone and looked out the window. A black sedan was already pulling up to the curb of the plaza. Thaddeus stepped out. He had changed clothes. The cashmere was gone, replaced by a fresh navy suit that looked sharp enough to cut skin. He didn't look like a man who had just been processed by federal agents. He looked like a man arriving for a board meeting. He walked straight to my trailer, bypassing the yellow police tape that the local deputies had half-heartedly strung up. I stepped out to meet him. I wasn't going to let him inside my perimeter. We met in the snow, 10 yards from the archway. He smelled of expensive soap and mints, masking the scent of the jail cell. "You made a scene, Cade," Thaddeus said, his voice level, devoid of the fear I had seen earlier. He adjusted his cufflinks. "A very dramatic, very public scene. My lawyers are already drafting the civil suit for unlawful arrest and defamation. You might have a badge, but you are operating outside your jurisdiction on the wire fraud charge. That transfer was a donation. You induced it. That is entrapment." I crossed my arms. "Oh, it is only entrapment if I force you to commit a crime you weren't already predisposed to commit, Thaddeus. You have been laundering HOA fees through Vanguard Consulting for 5 years. I have the ledgers." He smiled, a thin reptilian stretching of his lips. "Ledgers can be interpreted in many ways. Consulting fees are legal. And as for the power outage? Octavia acted alone. A hysterical woman under pressure. I was merely an observer. You have nothing that will stick to me, Agent Mercer. But I have something on you. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It wasn't a legal document. It was a photograph. It was a picture of me, taken 6 years ago, standing next to a witness in a case that had gone sideways in Chicago. A witness who had disappeared. It was a low blow. A threat to drag my past into the light, to muddy the waters of the present. You leave Oakhaven by sunset, Thaddeus whispered, stepping closer. You drop the federal holds on my accounts, or I make sure every newspaper in the state runs a story about the rogue Treasury agent who harasses community leaders and has a history of losing assets. I will bury you in so much red tape you won't be able to breathe. He turned and walked away, his shoes crunching on the snow. He didn't wait for an answer. He assumed he had won. He assumed that, like everyone else he had bullied, manipulated, or paid off, I had a breaking point. But he made the same mistake Octavia made. He thought I was playing a political game. He didn't realize that for me, this was purely mathematical. And in mathematics, variables like blackmail only change the equation if you let them. I didn't feel fear. I felt focused. If Thaddeus was out, it meant he had access to his assets again. It meant he was going to try to scrub the servers. I went back into the trailer and locked the door. I sat at my terminal and initiated a level 5 trace. I didn't just look at the Vanguard account anymore. I widened the net. I tapped into the county's digital infrastructure, using the warrant authorization I still held. I looked for the judge who had granted bail, Judge Harmon. I cross-referenced Harmon's financial disclosures with Thaddeus's shell companies. It took 10 minutes. A direct line. A campaign contribution of $50,000 made 3 days before the bond hearing, dated retroactively. Bribery. But I needed more. I needed the source. I pulled up the blueprints of the Oakhaven Plaza again. The bond default. The land. Why did Thaddeus want it so badly? It wasn't just about the money from the HOA fees. That was petty cash to a man like him. I layered the 1928 survey map over the modern zoning grid. I zoomed in. There, running directly beneath the fountain, was a red line on the old map. A subterranean easement, not for water, for telecommunications. An old, abandoned trunk line that had been laid during the Cold War and forgotten. I switched databases. I accessed the current fiber optic grid maps. That abandoned line wasn't abandoned. It was a dark fiber trunk, a high-speed data pipeline that connected the financial district in Chicago to the server farms in the south. It was worth millions in leasing rights. And it ran right through the property Thaddeus was trying to seize. If he owned the land, he owned the access rights. He wasn't stealing Christmas. He was trying to hijack a digital artery of the national economy. This was the smoking gun. But I needed him to put his hand on it. I needed to catch him trying to liquidate the HOA to buy the land title before the city realized what they were sitting on. I checked the HOA alerts. Thaddeus had called an emergency meeting at the town hall for 6 p.m. The agenda: dissolution of assets due to federal interference. He was going to burn the HOA down, sell the liabilities, which included the land title, to his shell company for $1, and walk away with the fiber line. I spent the afternoon preparing. I didn't call for backup this time. I needed to walk into that room alone. I needed Thaddeus to think he had intimidated me. I put on my flannel shirt again, covering my badge. I put on the work boots. I wanted him to see the carpenter, not the agent. I wanted him to feel safe. The town hall was a colonial-style building with white pillars and a drafty auditorium. By 6 p.m., it was packed. The residents of Oakhaven, confused and angry about the raid and the power outage, filled the wooden benches. Thaddeus stood at the podium, alone. Octavia was still in custody, the convenient scapegoat. Thaddeus looked solemn, a grieving leader forced to make hard choices. "Neighbors, friends," Thaddeus boomed, his voice echoing off the rafters. "We have been attacked. An overzealous federal agent has frozen our accounts based on the hysterical actions of our former president, Ms. Prentice. To protect our community, to save our property values from seizure, we must take drastic action. We must dissolve the current legal entity of the HOA and transfer our physical assets to a private holding trust. It is the only way to keep the government from seizing your parks, your fountains, your very square." The crowd murmured, frightened. He was playing them like a fiddle. He held up a document. "I have the motion here. I need a majority vote. We sell the plaza title to Vanguard Trust for $1, effectively shielding it from federal forfeiture. We buy it back once this investigation clears. It is a procedural formality." He uncapped a gold pen. "Who will second the motion?" I kicked open the double doors at the back of the hall. The sound was like a thunderclap. Every head turned. I walked down the center aisle, my boots heavy on the floorboards. "I objected to the motion," I said, my voice calm but carrying to the back row. Thaddeus looked up. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "you have no standing here. You are not a resident. You are a trespasser who has already caused enough damage." "Actually," I said, reaching the front of the room and climbing the steps to the stage, "I am the majority bondholder of the lien on this property, which means I have the only vote that matters, and I am not selling." Thaddeus laughed, a nervous, skittering sound. "Your bond is a relic, Mercer. It is worthless paper. The judge will throw it out tomorrow." "Maybe," I said. "But the judge won't throw this out." I pulled a flash drive from my pocket and plugged it into the laptop connected to the projector. The screen behind Thaddeus flickered to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a map. The dark fiber line, glowing red beneath the plaza. "You aren't protecting the community, Thaddeus," I said, turning to the audience. "You are trying to steal a fiber optic trunk line worth $40 million. You have been sabotaging the plaza, driving up maintenance costs, and creating artificial crises like the power outage so the HOA would be forced to sell the land to your shell company. Vanguard Consulting isn't a trust. It is a data leasing firm registered in your name." The crowd gasped. Thaddeus's face went white. He lunged for the laptop, trying to yank the cord. I caught his wrist. He was weak, softer than he looked. "Let go of me," he hissed. "You have no proof of intent." "I have the bribe you paid Judge Harmon," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "And I have Octavia." Thaddeus froze. "What?" "I visited her an hour ago," I lied. "She didn't want to go down alone. She told me about the fiber line. She told me about the kickbacks. She told me everything. It was a bluff." Octavia hadn't said a word. But Thaddeus didn't know that. He was a man who viewed loyalty as a transaction, so he assumed everyone else did too. He believed she had flipped because he would have flipped in her position. "You are lying," he snarled, pulling his arm free. He turned to the crowd. "This man is a government agitator. He is fabricating evidence. I am your treasurer. I have served this community for 20 years. The side door opened, but it wasn't the police. It was Octavia Prentice. She was still wearing her wrinkled light blue suit, looking haggard, released on her own recognizance pending arraignment. She stood in the doorway, her eyes burning with a fury that made the fire marshal look like a kitten. She had heard Thaddeus throw her under the bus. She had heard him call her hysterical. She walked onto the stage. She didn't look at me. She looked at Thaddeus. "You told me it was for the good of the neighborhood," she said, her voice shaking. "You told me the power surge would just pop a breaker. You didn't tell me you were trying to sell the land out from under us." "Octavia," Thaddeus warned, his voice tight. "Don't say another word." She turned to the microphone. "He has a second set of books," she announced to the stunned room, "under the floorboards of his office. The Ghost Ledger. It lists every bribe, every stolen fee, every penny he siphoned off for the fiber deal." Thaddeus lunged at her. It was a desperate, animalistic move. He shoved her aside, knocking the microphone stand over with a screech of feedback. He ran for the back exit. He didn't make it 3 steps. I tackled him. We hit the floor hard. The wind knocked out of him. He scrambled, trying to claw his way to the door, his dignity forgotten, replaced by the primal urge to escape the cage. I pinned him, twisting his arm behind his back until he stopped thrashing. "Stay down, Thaddeus," I said. The doors burst open again. My team, the federal agents who had been waiting in the perimeter. They swarmed the stage. This time, there was no bail hearing. This time, the charges included attempted flight, assault, and massive racketeering. They hauled Thaddeus up. He was bleeding from a cut on his lip. He looked at the crowd, at the people he had fooled for decades. They looked back with silence. No one offered to post his bond. No one offered to write a character reference. He was alone. Octavia sat on the edge of the stage, weeping. She was guilty, certainly. She had been a willing pawn, blinded by her own desire for petty power. She would face charges. She would lose her suit, her reputation, and her freedom. But she had done one decent thing in the end. She had burned the king to save the kingdom. I stood up, brushing the dust from my flannel shirt. I walked to the podium and picked up the microphone. "The motion to dissolve is denied," I said. The room erupted in raw relief. The Ghost Ledger exposed everything, redirecting millions back to Oak Haven schools. I kept the market open until Christmas Eve, then transferred the land bond to a public trust, forever ending the HOA's grip. On the final night, a neighbor thanked me, finally realizing who the real enemy was. "Once the rot is gone," I told her, "the wood heals on its own." I drove into the dark, ready for the next audit. Tyrants like Thaddeus forget there are people like me in the shadows, carrying a hammer in one hand and a badge in the other. Hit that like button if you agree that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who listens before they strike.
Thanks for staying to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe to IS Stories.